This week on The Unraveling, How Your Reality is Made Up.
Stern developed severe depression. She was admitted to a psychiatric hospital for 11 months.
I was homeless at the time. Not sleep on the street homeless, but close. But eventually found my place and my people.
She was browsing the refugee camp as if she were at the farmer's market looking for the best piece of produce.
I have 6 more exceptional young people, so I'm creating Strongheart House in Africa.
This bullet necklace sales grossed more than $250,000.
UN set out to make sure that you guys are not taking them to enslavement. Strongheart then signed a paper with UN stating that they're going to help us. So that's how they flew us.
That would be consistent with international definitions of trafficking by deception.
It is what it is, right? And I think we're not making any legal conclusions. That's not our job. Our job is to put out there what the facts are, what the truth is, and let the attorneys conclude what they may.
When you know something and you're putting these things together and you're just like, oh my gosh, I feel like this is one of the biggest things in the world.
And this is a story about people who are saying one thing and something else is going on behind the scenes.
Part of what my NGO does is we work with kids from exceptional young people from extreme circumstances.
Who are you when you're off camera? Who are you in the dark?
I don't think I'd want someone to make a film about my nonprofit. You don't want to see the sausage being made.
Because we don't believe victims. We don't believe the less powerful person ever. Have things that are hidden be made visible. At least you can see the snake now. This is big, right? This is big. How far does this thing go?
What if your greatest enemy was camouflaged, posing in your life? Perhaps your closest confidant, a family member, or a favorite politician. Exploiting your weaknesses, sabotaging your goals, learning your vulnerabilities. And what would you do if they framed you for a crime you didn't commit? What would you do if they turned your friends against you, convinced everyone you were delusional? And what would you do if they hired a lawyer to weaponize a cease and desist against you? Would you stay quiet? What would you do if no one believed you? How far would they go for a lie? And how far would you go for the truth? A true psychological horror story about how our society is shaped, not by left or right, man or woman, religious or secular, but by predators and prey. Follow me down a rabbit hole of manipulation, power, and psychological warfare, where reality is constructed, not communicated. A journey that reshaped my entire understanding of trust, credibility, and ultimately had me asking, what does it even mean to be human? A story of deception, manipulation, and power so sophisticated and orchestrated, it's almost like it was scripted. This is The Unraveling. My first week back home after filming my interview for the docuseries, Shiny Happy People, my mind was spinning as I tried to process everything that had happened. During an evening of personal conversation in the director's hotel room, she brought up the topic of neurodivergence. I didn't realize then how life-changing that conversation would be. At the time, I had recently been diagnosed with ADHD, but autism had never crossed my mind. My ex-husband was autistic, and since I didn't have the same traits he did, I assumed it didn't apply to me. But as we talked, the director said a few things that made me start to wonder. As is my way, I dove straight into research. I downloaded an audiobook and listened to it while driving. I can still remember the exact spot in the road when the author described the traits that perfectly matched my own. That was my moment of realization. Oh my gosh, I'm autistic. When I got home, I pulled out my ADHD evaluation and noticed something that I'd totally missed before at the bottom. It said also suspected autism. Now, to some, that might not sound like a big deal. Why would it matter to get another label as an adult? But unless you've lived it, it's hard to explain the psychological toll of being told your whole life that your natural reactions are wrong. The constant invalidation, being told, no, it's not too loud or too cold or too bright. It erodes your trust in your own perceptions. And over time, that kind of epistemic invalidation teaches you to doubt yourself and defer to other people's opinions. Learning that there was a neurological explanation behind all of this was absolutely life-changing. I spent the next few weeks learning how autism manifests differently in adults, especially women, compared to the outdated stereotypes based on little boys. Autism isn't a single set of symptoms like I had thought. It's more like a series of dials that are tuned to different settings. Where a neurotypical person's dial might sort of sit in the middle, an autistic person's might be turned all the way up or all the way down. And those dials might involve sensory input, emotional intensity, pattern recognition, sense of justice, or a million other things. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had permission to exist as myself. I wasn't a broken neurotypical person. I was a normal autistic person. That realization lifted decades of shame and self-doubt. I felt immense gratitude toward the director for introducing this perspective into my life. No one had ever helped me understand myself that deeply before. It felt like the opposite of a red flag. We swapped articles and memes about autism over text. One she sent me that I really resonated with said, "Nobody is mad at me. Nobody is mad at me, and if they were, they would say so. Nobody is mad at me, and if they were, they would say so, and if they haven't said so, then it's not my responsibility to read into their silence. Nobody is mad at me." And I responded saying, I wish that was true. People love to be mad and not tell you. That's probably why I can only have neurodivergent friends. Finally, I met someone who was on the same wavelength as me. I didn't have to explain my quirks all the time. She just got it. She even referred to our similar personalities once as Cori Micah personality disorder. I thought she was signaling a mutual recognition. After all, what possible motive could she have to fake all of this? I've already done the interview, and I'm just a small part of the show.
Are you looking for a nonprofit you can start today? No experience, qualifications, or oversight required? Tired of building codes, ethics standards, or background checks getting in the way of your savior complex? Try opening an orphanage in Africa. No reliable electricity? No problem. No running water, paved roads, or child protection services? Even better. You'll fit right in with thousands of other untrained volunteers finding themselves through someone else's suffering. Because nothing says, "I'm a good person," like flying to another country to create a new attachment wound for destitute children.
Cori Shepherd Stern, Hollywood producer and co-founder of the humanitarian nonprofit Strongheart, said that opening a home for refugee children was her lifelong dream. When asked what propelled her to aid Lovetta, she revealed,
I was a Strongheart kid. I did not have an easy childhood and at one point was even homeless. I have always wanted to create a house where kids from challenging situations could come together and plant strong and healthy roots. When I met Lovetta, I knew it was time to fulfill that dream.
In 2010, on the inauguration of her organization's new refugee home and healing center, she tweeted,
First night in Strongheart House with our fellows. A dream 27 years in the making.
The origin of the dream. What happened 27 years ago? That would have been 1983. So she would have been in high school. What do we know about those years? A glowing profile in her college's magazine gives us some insight into her personal history. The University of Laverne writes,
She had been intermittently homeless, sleeping on various couches and using a garden hose to shower. When people think homeless, they think you have a shopping cart on the street, but it's really about not having a stable place to live, she said. Home life was tumultuous. Her mother and siblings survived what Stern described as a difficult situation with her father. They fled Florida for California, where Stern, her mother, and 3 siblings settled in Montclair.
There is a lot to digest here. So as a child, she was displaced from her home because of an abusive father. It makes sense that her needs for stability and belonging would be unmet as a result.
Stern developed severe depression in her new surroundings. In high school, she was admitted to a psychiatric hospital where she received treatment for 11 months.
11 months. Nearly 1 year. That's a long inpatient stay for a minor. That kind of formative experience would profoundly affect anyone. The question isn't whether she survived trauma. It's whether surviving alone qualified her to design a neuroscience-based rehabilitation program for traumatized children and in a cross-cultural context. When someone raises funds under the banner of trauma healing for children, the public has a right to ask what professional qualifications and oversight were in place.
By the time Stern graduated high school, she and her mother had been couch hopping for months, but Stern still managed to get accepted to Laverne. She majored in international relations, Professor Keeler remembers Stern. She always had a plan B and C if plan A did not work out, Keeler said. When Cori wanted to get something done, she taught herself or found a way to build a team to accomplish the goal. Stern and classmate Cindy Banky started a Sigma Kappa chapter at Laverne, partly because Stern felt she did not fit in with other Greek organizations. It became Laverne's first national sorority.
That relentless drive reappears throughout her story. If established systems don't open their doors, she builds her own. Sorority, stage, nonprofit, even family.
A play Stern wrote called One Invincible Summer, about her stint in the hospital, launched her career as a playwright. She became the writer-in-residence at the O. Henry Museum in Austin, Texas.
In most cases, a long-term psychiatric admission for a minor would have meant a period of near-total powerlessness, a time when all your choices, movements, even thoughts are monitored. So it's interesting, when she wrote a play about her stint in the hospital, she named it One Invincible Summer. That play launches her creative career. Maybe this was the moment she discovered how powerful it can be to rename something as its opposite, as a sort of shortcut to a redemption story. It's a pattern she would repeat, calling things the opposite of what they are, and convincing the world that is evidence of its transformation.
She also married Doug Stern, who worked as a stand-up comic. The couple struggled financially, and eventually Stern found herself couch hopping once again. She and her husband moved to California in search of work.
She described it this way in her blog.
I was homeless at the time. Not sleep on the street homeless, but close. Sleep in a camper on a friend's driveway. Shower with a water hose. Use the gas station bathroom homeless. It was this low, this period where nothing I touched seemed to go my way, that finally forced me to pull everything I had inside me to pack up and try my dream in Hollywood. It wasn't a graceful exit. It was hard and uncertain and scary and rough. I was homeless in LA, another camper, another driveway, but had eventually found my place and my people and my dream, which happened to be in the form of both film and the aforementioned young people from challenging places.
So a second bout with homelessness after marriage. Again, that need for stability and groundedness is unmet. When she describes Strongheart and the refugee kids as her people and her place and her dream, I can't help but wonder if it's a way to externalize that unmet longing for stability and family belonging. But is it appropriate for a white woman to fuse her identity with these refugee children, some of whom do have their own parents and families?
A Hollywood temp agency placed her with a company that later merged with the Fox Family Channel. When Fox Family was bought by ABC, she was given a considerable severance package, and with more free time on her hands, Stern's thoughts returned to the idea of helping children far away.
It's remarkable how a single opportunity can redirect a life's course. Without that temp agency placing her with Saban, her trajectory and her eventual path toward humanitarian work might have looked very different. But there's one more thing about this article that catches my attention.
In 2005, Stern encountered a 12-year-old Liberian girl in a refugee camp in Ghana. Conto, now 17, is a jewelry designer who transforms bullet casings from the Liberian War into necklaces through her company, Akawele. Proceeds helped build the Strongheart House in Liberia, a place where children from all over the world participated in the fellowship program. The house has since been relocated to Austin.
When this article is published in 2015, Strongheart House no longer exists as a residential center anywhere in Austin or Liberia. And in 2015, Lovetta would be 22, not 17. So what's going on? Is the director just continuing to tell the story as if it's happening in the present? You're listening to The Unraveling, How Your Reality is Made Up.
Let's face it, deep down, you just don't like certain parts of yourself. Pain, weakness, unmet needs. Why face that truth when you can outsource it? Don't sit with discomfort when you can assign it to someone else and feel morally superior in the process. You're not angry at yourself. You're angry at them. Try projection, self-rejection in disguise. Projection, the original defense mechanism. And don't forget to check out our sister product, Blame. She made me do it. Side effects may include blind spots, defensiveness, and total stagnation of personal growth.
I was in Badu Burum refugee camp talking to Diana, a grad student doing research. I told her about Strongheart. I said the kind of kids we're looking for are the ones who just make you say, "Where did you come from?" Her eyes lit up, and she said, You have to meet Gabriel. Like Lovetta, everyone in camp knows Gabriel. Right now, he's rocking the only fro in camp, very fashion forward. He's always got something unusual going on, very Andre 3000. He looks like a Boondocks character here to me. He has a presence that is pretty obvious to everyone who meets him.
Ordinarily, selecting children within a UN-administered refugee camp is restricted to accredited child protection organizations. Yet her own writing suggests she was informally spreading word, browsing the refugee camp as if she were at the farmer's market looking for the best piece of produce. Actively scouting for exceptional children who reframed vulnerable minors as talent to be discovered, rather than as minors entitled to protection and care. Her selection appears extractive, based on charisma, image, and narrative appeal, rather than formal referral or guardianship processes. That's an approach that appears to directly contravene the UN High Commission on Refugees and UNICEF's child protection standards. Her writing suggests she viewed refugee children as aesthetic, inspirational characters for a media project available for her to extract and monetize, rather than as young people whose safety required formal oversight. When the criteria for quote-unquote help is subjective traits like intelligence or resilience or presence, it risks reinforcing a selective savior complex where only the most inspiring victims are deemed worthy of rescue. That allows founders to choose who receives aid based on personal chemistry or potential, excluding children who are visibly traumatized, harder to present publicly. The psychological effect of that is subtle but powerful. If the program's legitimacy rests on traits like strength, gratitude, resilience, participants can become trapped in the performance because they must continually appear resilient and healed and grateful and strong in order to retain the belonging. It's a coercive dynamic that builds conformity through self-policing. Because if you're intelligent and resilient and exceptional, then you can't be depressed, traumatized, anxious, or, God forbid, angry. And if you are, well, there must be something wrong with you. You must stay resilient, grateful, and high-functioning to remain worthy of the opportunity. And any deviation from that ideal risks emotional exile. It's the exact same performance trap I experienced at Teen Mania, and it took a serious toll on my mental health.
Are you looking for a nonprofit you can start today? No experience, qualifications, or oversight required? Tired of building codes, ethics standards, or background checks getting in the way of your savior complex? Try opening an orphanage in Africa. No reliable electricity? No problem. No running water, paved roads, or child protection services. Even better. You'll fit right in with thousands of other untrained volunteers finding themselves through someone else's suffering. Because nothing says, I'm a good person, like flying to another country to create a new attachment wound for destitute children.
Here she introduces her newest recruits, a family of 6 orphan siblings, the Freemans.
I have 6 more exceptional young people that I want to bring into the program immediately. They're amazing, but I need a place to shelter them as we do this work, a permanent home base for their healing. So I'm creating Strongheart House, an intentional learning and healing community to be based in Africa. We'll start with these 6, plus Lovetta, who will also live there, and then expand as quickly and sustainably as possible.
The fundraising plea sets the emotional stage.
The camp is the only thing they've ever known, and now they're leaving. The Ghanaian government has declared that it's time all refugees must either return to Liberia or agree to assigned resettlement in rural areas of Ghana. For those that choose to go home to Liberia, the UN is giving each refugee a ticket to Liberia and $100 to begin their new life. Only $50 for children. For the Freeman family, if they get on that plane and disembark in their home country, they have no one to help them find a home, continue their education, make sure they're fed, safe, loved.
That framing that these children have nowhere to go is one of the oldest tropes in humanitarian fundraising. But the picture she paints of 6 orphan kids alone, dropped on the streets with $50 in their pockets, it might tug on the heartstrings and open the wallets, but it bears no resemblance to reality on the ground. It's manipulative by design, deceiving people into feeling complicit in these children's fates if they don't donate. But sending unaccompanied Liberian children back into a war-torn country without verified family or guardians was illegal under both UN and Ghanaian law, as well as the Convention on the Rights of the Child. The reality, the unaccompanied Liberian children were actually a special class. They were entitled to case review, family tracing, and they were prioritized for resettlement in either Australia, Canada, or Norway. So yet again, Cori Shepherd Stern's narrative inverted reality. She took the group with the highest protection priority under UN policy and portrayed them as the most abandoned and destitute. By inserting herself into the process, she likely diverted the entire family from being resettled in a first world country and instead forced them into the third world deprivation conditions at her Strongheart House.
I've made it my mission to make sure these kids have a place to live. This is a truly grassroots effort. We found a rental house in Liberia, which is now safe after years of war. We have a wonderful local woman to help raise them, acting as house mother. We also need money for food, school fees, and other living expenses.
I've made it my mission individualizes what should be a regulated child welfare process. Positioning herself as the sole savior ensuring the kids' survival might make for good storytelling, but it's a serious boundary violation because unaccompanied minors are legally under the jurisdiction of the UNHCR, the High Commission on Refugees, not private foreigners picking guardians and making their own housing arrangements.
I know the economy is crazy and everyone is scared, but I also know that those young people are without a net. And while we are suffering here, it's compounded enormously over there.
The kids weren't suffering without a net. They had a net. By omitting the truth about their rights to resettlement with accredited organizations and implying no one else is doing anything, she positions Western donors as the only line between life and death. Now, if Strongheart had been formally accredited with the UN, they would have been assigned a case officer to monitor the minors after relocation. They would have visited the home to verify housing, education, and vetting of the caretaker, that house mother. But there's no public record or documentation indicating that such oversight occurred. In fact, painting this as a, quote, grassroots effort suggests that it is outside of any formal oversight.
And UN said, okay, and we're going to do it up to make sure that you guys are not taking them to enslavement. So that's how they flew us. Strongheart then signed the paper with UN people stating that they're going to help us. That's how the paperwork was done for us to be governed by Strongheart.
That's Grace Freeman, one of the older children in the sibling group. She was interviewed on a podcast several years ago and did not have any positive things to say about her experience with Strongheart. If Strongheart did remove the children from lawful oversight, that would be consistent with international definitions of trafficking by deception. These are serious issues, and they warrant further examination by authorities and journalists, but at minimum, they highlight how the power of storytelling can replace the truth. Meanwhile, the children have been promised a permanent home base for their healing, the first home of their own that they've ever known. But is that a promise they can count on?
Are you looking for a nonprofit you can start today? No experience, qualifications, or oversight required? Tired of building codes, ethics standards, or background checks getting in the way of your savior complex? Try opening an orphanage in Africa. No reliable electricity? No problem. No running water, paved roads, or child protection services. Even better. You'll fit right in with thousands of other untrained volunteers finding themselves through someone else's suffering. Because nothing says, I'm a good person, like flying to another country to create a new attachment wound for destitute children.
If you could start a home and healing center for refugee children anywhere in the world, how would you choose a location? You'd probably make a list, must-haves like electricity, running water, safe roads, good schools, a library, access to basic healthcare. Then maybe a few nice-to-haves like parks or museums or a nearby university. So why choose Liberia?
Westerners in Liberia are a very rare breed. They're usually spotted behind tinted windows in white Toyota Land Cruisers. They certainly don't wander aimlessly around the streets or explore the ruins of urban decay. They're a species that thrives in the daytime but lock themselves away after dark, retreating behind armed guards and 10-foot-high walls crowned with concertina wire. Most development workers and embassy officials aren't actually allowed outside their massive compounds after dark. It's part of their contract.
When she's recruiting volunteers or fundraising, Liberia is presented as a wonderful place to visit, full of friendly people and possibility. Through her 10 days mission trips, Cori encourages volunteers to come change the world by helping rehab the Strongheart House.
Strongheart House is located in the beautiful country of Liberia. We'll spend most of our time in the beautiful beach community of Robertsport, one of the top surf spots in Africa. Check out this Lonely Planet article, Surfing Liberia, about the hidden treasure that is Robertsport. Also, you can see the incredible waves at Sliding Liberia. It's a beautiful surf film made about our little city.
She's selling it as Liberia is not so bad, it's just bad press. Safe, thriving space for international collaboration. In one interview, she paints it as a charming community.
When I was living in Liberia, in a little village on the beach, I figured out that I am really a village person. Cities are too big and rural areas are too lonely. I like to walk to get coffee, know all my neighbors. I wanted that same thing back in the States.
Humanitarian street cred doesn't come from living in idyllic beach villages. In other venues, like her talks at the Skoll Foundation events, her tone shifts dramatically.
I was living in Liberia at the time, and I was really trying to make sense of what I was seeing in Liberia, because it was just horrific. It was so post-conflict. Everything was destroyed. There were just no, I mean, it was horrible.
Two different portrayals for two different audiences. Even the volunteers weren't quite expecting the conditions that awaited them.
Because when I was there, I remember there were still bombed out buildings.
Right.
No electricity, no running water. I mean, it was rough in a way that really surprised me.
That's one of the volunteers, a therapist, who's reminiscing about her time with one of the Strongheart kids. After the Civil War, all the infrastructure was destroyed. All. Literally everything that makes society run. The UN ranks them near the very bottom on the Human Development Index, 181 out of 189. No infrastructure, economy, or opportunities, that's strike one. Then there's safety and human rights. How safe is Liberia for women and children? Unfortunately, violence against women has deep roots in Liberia. Reports from the UN and human rights groups documented that during the Civil War, 60 to 90% of women experienced sexual violence. FGM is still legal today. That's female genital mutilation. It's been practiced on nearly half of adult women. There are essentially zero penalties for rape in Liberia. According to reports from the UN Chronicle, the police don't even know how to collect evidence from a rape scene. And in 2009, President Sirleaf publicly acknowledged, quote, "We don't have a judiciary that's sensitized to rape as a crime against humanity." And she was the first woman president. In many places, women are still functionally the property of men, and violence is a man's right. So judges don't even think of it as a crime. They think of it as a right. Doing this research, I'm reading about literally some of the worst human rights atrocities imaginable. And these were just routine for years in Liberia. So no protections for women or children, strike two. Each year, Liberia received hundreds of millions of dollars in foreign aid, peaking in 2010 at more than $1.4 billion. But an audit in 2015 found that over 90% of the vendors in aid programs had not been properly vetted, nor was there adequate follow-up to verify how the funds were spent. 90% of vendors, $1.4 billion in 1 year alone. After more than a decade and billions in aid, the reality on the ground in Liberia shows little measurable improvement. But all that money, it did end up in someone's pockets. Rampant government corruption, that's strike three. The Strongheart House was located in Robertsport, a small fishing village of roughly 4,000 people. In Robertsport, there were no grocery stores, no reliable electricity, no running water, no formal child protection services, no economy to speak of. Yet this was chosen as the headquarters for an international child rehabilitation program. So why? Why Liberia? With all of these significant drawbacks, why choose Liberia? According to this 2008 Emirates article,
Cori soon teamed up with Zoe Adams, a former TV executive colleague and fellow activist, and set out to find the ideal location for the home. Robertsport, with its incredible potential for ecotourism, especially as a surfing and beach destination, was exactly what they were looking for.
Ecotourism potential, not infrastructure, oversight, or safety, was cited as the deciding factor. But what does ecotourism have to do with a healing center for refugee children? The kids might not know yet, but they will.
Because Strongheart organization kicked my entire family out of the program.
Looking to change the world without all that pesky red tape? No teaching credentials? No problem. No background checks, case files, or standards of care? No problem. Want to turn your orphanage into a money-making surf retreat using orphan labor? Absolutely no problem. At White Savior Works, we turn your vague desire to help into a fully branded humanitarian experience. Because as long as you raise money and feel like you're making a difference, who cares what happens to the kids? So grab your passport, your camera, and your conviction that you're the answer they've been waiting for. Because here, white skin isn't just privilege, it's all the credibility you'll ever need. White Savior Works, turning photo ops into moral authority since 2003.
In the last episode, we looked at Strongheart's list of Phase 1 accomplishments for its inaugural fellow, Lovetta Conto. Overall, the entire list of Phase 1 accomplishments in their 2008 IRS filing resembles the grooming process far more than it does any reputable child welfare practices. Authentic child development goals focus on restoring a child's safety, trust, autonomy, and agency. But the Phase 1 list presented by Strongheart reads more like behavior engineering to create a compliant, photogenic success story who validates the program's philosophy. Perhaps the most alarming item was the claim that a 15-year-old Lovetta should become financially self-sufficient. The irony is striking. The same year that Lovetta started the program, the organization's director publicly described her own financial instability. I covered that in the last episode. The federal filing states that Strongheart
successfully guided Lovetta in learning the skills she needed to be financially self-sufficient, enabling her to break away from the mentality that she was a victim in the world who needed aid to survive.
The mentality that she was a victim in the world who needed aid to survive. That phrasing is a huge red flag. Was a child being told not to, quote, need aid while under the care of adults running an aid organization? A 15-year-old can't legally or practically be self-supporting. Framing her dependency as a personal weakness turns a normal developmental need into moral failure. Not to mention the logistics of it. Does Lovetta have a work permit? Is she able to access a bank account?
This breakthrough caused her to move up the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, past the physiological and safety needs stages, and into the stage where she could begin to think about and care for the community around her.
The inversion of Maslow's hierarchy is breathtaking. A teen forced to provide for their own basic survival will feel the opposite of secure. No child moves past their physiological and safety needs without being anchored in consistent safety over a long period of time. And real trauma work doesn't prescribe empathy as a duty. It restores a person's right to boundaries. Strongheart's language reframed those boundaries as selfishness. Another red flag, another inversion of the truth. And lastly, how can you choose a fellow for her resilience and her humanitarian work, but then turn around and claim credit for teaching her how to care about community? This is such a shocking level of gaslighting, I'm actually offended on Lovetta's behalf. And it reminds me of the time a few months into our relationship. The first time I told her it felt like she was gaslighting me. Her response was something along the lines of, "Ugh, I hate it when people say that." And I thought to myself, well, if you're hearing that feedback a lot, I don't think the problem is other people. But she had a cutting way of dismissing your concerns so that you felt needy or weak for bringing it up again. A dynamic that would be especially damaging for a traumatized teen in her care. Between 2008 and 2010, Lovetta's bullet necklace sales grossed more than $250,000. With prices between $75 and $130, these weren't impulse buys. After claiming roughly $80,000 for cost of goods, profit is $170,000 over 3 years. Not bad. So where does all that money go? In 2008, Strongheart listed living expenses for Lovetta at $2,811. There are some other categories for like office supplies and technology, and that may have covered school supplies, so I'm going to generously assume that the living expenses only needed to cover her food and toiletries. That works out to $7.70 per day, about $2.56 per meal. This is $2008, but that still doesn't seem like quite enough for a 15-year-old. Does she only need $7.70 a day because she has become financially self-sufficient now? Nothing in the filing shows that Lovetta was paid wages, so that claim is still unexplained. I suppose it's possible that her labor was compensated as part of the cost of goods in making the jewelry, but the entire cost of goods is only $4,000 for 2008, so that doesn't seem likely. And if she didn't work a minimum wage job somewhere else, and Strongheart didn't pay her, how was she making money? There's only one way I know of that desperate or homeless kids make cash off the books. The next year, the amount nearly doubled to $5,087, still barely $14 a day, but maybe she splurged and got some medical or dental care. Press coverage often claimed that 100% of the proceeds supported Strongheart House, though a few outlets say only half of the proceeds. Yet, for the first 2 years, the single largest expense category wasn't housing or education. It was travel.
Strongheart chose Liberia because it is a country with an incredible desire to overcome a long and brutal civil war.
Over the next 2 years, Strongheart volunteers rehab a former hotel.
We're actively looking for volunteers. If you have a passion for our mission and at least 2 weeks to give, contact us. Our next 2 trips are to Liberia to create a home and learning center called Strongheart House. Each volunteer will be responsible for raising $2,500 in addition to their airfare. Creature comforts. There will be some creatures, and not a lot of comforts. You will, however, have the comfort of knowing you're suffering through a little dirt, grunge, and some bugs to save the world.
There's that world changer language again. The parallels to my own experience with Teen Mania are starting to come into focus. The docuseries she directed, Shiny Happy People Season 2, centered on Teen Mania's exploitation of youth through both short-term summer mission trips and a long-term residential program on their campus. And now, here we have a near carbon copy of that same system, just at a much smaller scale. Volunteers who pay to work, a residential campus in a remote area staffed by unqualified people, neglect and deprivation rebranded as healing, and all in service of fundraising narratives that don't really match lived reality.
The first 6 fellows have already been chosen. They're amazing young people from a refugee camp in Ghana and will be moving to Strongheart House to experience the first home of their own that some of them have ever known. At the end of our January trip, the kids will actually arrive, and you'll get to see the look of wonder and joy on their faces as they see their home for the first time.
But that joy and wonder did not last long.
Strongheart organization, my entire family and I were kicked out of the program.
That interview indicates that the lifelong dream of a home for exceptional children may not have been all that it was claimed to be. Next time, is the Strongheart House a home and healing center for refugee children? Or is it a surf retreat with the kids working as labor? Find out next time on The Unraveling, How Your Reality is Made Up. The Unraveling, How Your Reality is Made Up is written, produced, and narrated by me, Micah Ringo. You can find all my references and sources in the show notes. This podcast does not suggest that any of Cori Stern's associates or any of the children were willing, knowing accessories to criminal acts.